You probably think the internet killed your local newspaper. But there is a darker, hidden reason your town's investigative journalist disappeared decades ago: the deliberate weaponization of libel insurance and endless lawsuits. This is the story of how lawsuits became the most effective weapon for killing newspapers in America, and most people never even noticed it happening. Since 2005, the United States has lost nearly 2,900 newspapers. 2 vanish every single week. Right now, 212 counties in America have 0 locally based news sources, not one. Another 1,525 counties have just a single outlet left. These statistics come from Northwestern University's Medill State of Local News Project, and they add up to nearly 50 million Americans, 1 in 7 people in this country, living with limited or no access to local news. And while everyone loves to blame the internet or social media or people just not reading anymore, there's a quieter, more surgical killer that rarely makes the headlines itself: the lawsuit. Let's start with a small paper in Wisconsin called the Wausau Pilot and Review. 4 staff members. That's the whole operation. In 2023, they caught wind from a reader that someone at a county board meeting had called a 13-year-old boy a homophobic slur. They investigated, confirmed it with multiple witnesses, and published the story. The man accused, a local businessman named Corey Tomczyk, denied it and demanded a retraction. The paper refused, so Tomczyk sued them for defamation. Here's what happened next. A judge dismissed the case. 3 people who were in the room provided sworn statements that they heard the slur. In his own deposition, Tomczyk admitted he'd used the word in other situations. The newspaper won. Case closed. Justice served, right? Not exactly. By the time the dust settled, the Wausau Pilot and Review had racked up nearly $200,000 in legal bills. That's almost their entire annual newsroom budget. They had to freeze hiring. Their editor, Shireen Seward, said publicly that she had no idea how she could pay both her lawyers and her staff. A 4-person newspaper spent a year's worth of operating money defending a story that was true. They won every legal argument and still nearly lost everything. This is how it works. You don't have to win the lawsuit. You just have to file one. There's actually a name for this. It's called a SLAP, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. The term was coined back in 1988 by University of Denver professors George Pring and Penelope Kanan, and the playbook is simple. You sue someone not because you expect to win in court, but because you know the process itself will drain their money, their time, and their will to keep reporting. In 2024, First Amendment Watch at NYU documented 500 SLAP cases decided that year alone, including 69 targeting media outlets. Their researcher said, and I quote, "There were way more than I anticipated. And here's the part that should genuinely concern you." A 2022 survey by the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press found that 59% of journalists who had been sued for defamation changed their coverage afterward. Not because they realized they were wrong, because the cost and stress of being sued made them decide it wasn't worth it. That's not accountability. That's self-censorship induced by financial terror. Now, you might think this is just a small-town problem. Let me introduce you to the most famous media killing in modern history. In 2007, Gawker Media published an article outing Silicon Valley billionaire Peter Thiel as gay. Thiel was furious, but he didn't just rage about it. He waited, he strategized. And then, when Hulk Hogan sued Gawker in 2012 over the publication of a sex tape, Thiel secretly bankrolled the entire lawsuit. Not just funded it, but shaped it. Hogan's legal team actually dropped certain claims from the case, claims that would have triggered Gawker's insurance coverage, specifically so that when the verdict came in, the full financial weight would land directly on Gawker and its writers. You wouldn't do that if you wanted the most money. You'd do that if you wanted to destroy the company. The jury awarded Hogan $140 million. Gawker filed for bankruptcy in June 2016. Its founder, Nick Denton, later wrote that all-out legal war with Thiel would have cost too much and hurt too many people, and there was no end in sight. After bankruptcy, Univision acquired Gawker's assets for $135 million. A Valley billionaire used a proxy plaintiff to destroy a media company from the outside. Legally, quietly, completely. Now scale that dynamic down to the local level, where the median revenue for a nonprofit news outlet is about $477,000 a year. A single lawsuit can wipe that out. And remember, the United States has no federal anti-SLAP law. 38 states have some protections. California has among the strongest, but 12 states, including Texas and Wisconsin, have none at all. In those states, anyone with enough money and enough grievance can file a suit and simply wait for the newsroom to run out of cash. But lawsuits aren't just coming from local businessmen or vengeful billionaires anymore. Since returning to the White House, Donald Trump has launched 9 separate legal actions demanding $65 billion in damages from news organizations. In December 2024, ABC News settled a defamation claim for $15 million after George Stephanopoulos said Trump had been found liable for rape. In July 2025, CBS's parent company Paramount agreed to pay $16 million to settle another Trump lawsuit. Bob Korn-Revere, chief counsel at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, said the day the CBS settlement was announced, "A cold wind just blew through every newsroom this morning." Inside CBS, the settlement triggered anger and resignations. The executive producer of 60 Minutes and the president of CBS News both departed. And the message radiating outward from these settlements isn't subtle. Trump himself has said, quote, "It costs a lot of money to do it, but we have to straighten out the press." Meanwhile, at the Supreme Court level, Justices Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch have both called for reconsidering New York Times versus Sullivan, the landmark 1964 case that requires public officials to prove actual malice before winning a defamation suit. That standard has protected investigative journalism for over 60 years, from Watergate to tobacco industry exposés to reporting on corporate pollution. If Sullivan falls, the cost of reporting on powerful people shoots up dramatically, and the outlets least able to absorb that cost are the local papers already on life support. And this is really the point. When a local newspaper dies, it's not just a business closing. Research from Harvard Business School's Jacqueline Pizer found that after a local paper shuts down, environmental violations at nearby facilities increase by over 1%, and penalties jump by more than 15%. Nobody's watching anymore, so nobody behaves. Local corruption grows in the dark that local journalism used to illuminate. So let's connect the pieces. Tech monopolies like Google siphoned off the advertising revenue that kept local papers alive. Courts have confirmed this. In 2024 and 2025, federal judges ruled that Google illegally monopolized both the search and advertising markets. Then, once papers were financially weakened, lawsuits became the finishing blow. A slap doesn't need to succeed in court. It just needs to cost more than a 4-person newsroom can survive. The result is a country where nearly 50 million people live in news deserts, where the powerful face less scrutiny, and where the simple act of publishing a true story about what someone said at a county board meeting can bankrupt the paper that reported it. The lawsuits that killed your local newspaper didn't make headlines. That was the whole point.